Welcome to the Liberty North Show, where we cover this global fifth generation war from a Canadian perspective. We are really glad to have a special guest today. Mocha, welcome to the show. Mocha is an independent journalist who has been grinding in Canada to really bring forward a lot of the stories that aren't being covered, not only by the mainstream media, but by a lot of the alternative media as well. So we're really glad to have you here, brother. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you on online, but at some point we'll probably encounter in person. Your experience with the trucker convoy and the Coutts boys, can you explain to us how you got started with that, and then we can go from there?
Yes, I started with the protests in Toronto, the very beginning of COVID craziness, and there would be these small protests protesting against it, saying, "Hey, the World Health Organization is corrupt. Why are we listening to their orders? What is going on? Why are we shutting down stuff?" So every week for a year, there would be these protests, and then it's spread across the country. And then after a year or two, finally, it has come to a point of unity with the truckers. The truckers said, enough is enough. And so they rolled from one side of the country to the other. And Canada is pretty big. So I joined them to cover their journey from Calgary to Ottawa, which took about 5 to 6 days. You know, you would stop over at night to sleep, etc. Crazy weather conditions, but it was very cold. However, there were so many people along the way, hundreds of thousands of people. It was crazy, like nonstop in the middle of nowhere, on overpasses filled with people, just staying there hours and hours. So that was very heartwarming to see. I said, you know what, this convoy, first of all, the plan wasn't to go to Ottawa and stay. At least that was not known. But then I realized, you know what, such a big convoy like this, where it is getting bigger and bigger and bigger along the way, and there are so much support as they get closer to Ottawa, there's no way this is just gonna end. They're just gonna come and then they're just gonna go back. No, they are motivated now. They know who the will of the people is siding with. So that's what they did. They stayed there and they challenged the government to make good on its mandate, saying, hey, if you're so serious about it, come on, bring it on. But then there was another. From Ottawa, I drove directly to Coutts. And in Coutts, there was another situation unfolding similar to Ottawa, where farmers and truckers were blockading the border time to time. And they had the support of the community of that small town called Coutts. And I have done interviews with the residents of that place, including last year when there was an anniversary, and there's another anniversary happening in a few days. Another convoy heading down to Coutts, so I'll catch more interviews. But basically, I went down to Coutts and I saw people, I spoke to people. My experience has been, people were telling me that there are undercover officers everywhere. They are trying to cook something. Some people were leaving and telling me, I can't stay here. There are some people here with not the right mindset, etc. But it was well known that there were undercover officers. And then after that, 4 men was arrested. Actually, more than 4 was arrested. Some of them were released, but they kept the 4 on the charges of conspiracy to commit murder on police. And I was not aware of this until a year later. When there was an anniversary and they were fundraising for the 4. And I saw the headline. It was said, conspiracy to commit murder. I'm like, wow, this is really bad.
You knew they were in jail, though. You knew they were in jail. You just didn't know what the charges were.
Well, I didn't even know about their existence until a year later. It just, I don't know how, but I just didn't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know how it escaped me. But then I saw the anniversary of Congress, so I went there, and this is like one of my first independent works. I went down there, and I was interested to know the truth. So I started asking people, hey, these men are charged with some serious crimes. What do you have to say about that? How could you support such? And they articulated themselves in a very interesting manner. And I was surprised to hear that they were in remand for more than a year, that they still haven't been convicted.
With no trial, right? Yeah.
No trial. Yeah, they say, pedophiles, murderers, literal cop killers get bail. Why these four men? They are political prisoners. That's what they said. So I broadcasted that, and it resonated with the public, and it picked up. And then I realized, why is no other media reporting on this situation, especially the four men? Well, I kept covering it. I kept covering the court hearings, etc. And then the attention kept growing and growing and growing. And I'm still doing that. So that's how I became familiar with this. I'm always there in the courtroom whenever there's a court hearing.
So you got this accreditation as media that's allowed to be there. So now you're an accredited media presence in the courtroom. What does the rest of the courtroom look like in terms of media? Like, what has it been like? Are you joined by mainstream media, other alternative media? Like, what has the media presence been like throughout the case?
Well, throughout the case, the media presence has been minimal, especially the recent months. Now I have been to at least 10 court hearings, bail hearings, pre-trial, etc., day after day. And I'm the only accredited media sitting at the accredited media row in the courthouse, in the courtroom. It's the biggest courtroom in Lethbridge, and it is filled with supporters, family members, people. And then you have two large empty rows just for accredited media. But there is no accredited media there. It's just me sitting there. So rest of the row is being used as a place to put your jacket or your, notes, etc. So, the other day during the bail hearing, they didn't even have accredited media rows because nobody is showing up. And the hearing before that, they shut it down for online viewing because they asked, hey, is there any accredited media online? And nobody answered. So they shut down that as well. So the media, unbelievably, for such a high profile case, is turning a blind eye. And my theory is that it's because they have access to the evidence, what's under the publication ban. They just can't publish it, but they have access to it, and they have seen it, and they have deemed, you know what, these guys are guilty. We're not going to get into this. That's what they have done. And they were hoping that this story would be forgotten. It wouldn't, rise to such a
Prominent,
prominence.
high profile. Yeah.
Yeah, but it has. And now just watch them do 180 starting reporting on it, because we had Tucker Carlson speaking about it. We had him questioning the premier about it. Now it's an international issue. So watch them do 180 now. It's not media's job to decide who's guilty or not. The men are innocent until proven guilty. That's the principle that I operate on. That's the principle I thought every media was supposed to operate on.
What's your thoughts? So how would you formulate your thoughts on how the process is and how essentially unconstitutional they're being treated? They're being treated in a manner that, we don't treat terrorists. I don't understand how this is happening. What's your thoughts on, like, are there going to be repercussions for this? Can there be repercussions for this, for the government, for how they're dealing with this?
Well, you might say their treatment is unconstitutional, but what scares me is their treatment is constitutional. So I think that is very scary. And basically, they've been in remand for more than 710 days. Remand, not prison, where you're supposed to spend maybe a day or two until you're transferred to court and then set free, or to the real prison. But and their health needs was being neglected as well, and they have spent each of them, almost $500,000 on lawyers. So this is very, very bad. It's destroying families. In fact, one of the guys right now is contemplating to represent himself without a lawyer,
because it costs so much.
which is a terrible idea.
No, yeah. Well, so that's why your attention that you're bringing towards it is so important, because we need to kind of raise money for these people, because this is not just about these four people as much as it is about these four people. It's about the state of Canada and how people in general are treated. And if there is any other protests, this is making a statement for them, right? This is Justin Trudeau trying to make a statement to people, like, don't protest. Same thing with January 6th. So this is so important for so many reasons. So it's not even, we need to find a way to fund these guys and fund this guy's lawyer, for example, because this is not just his fight. This is a fight for the future of the country. And
They have a give, send, go, right?
Yes, they do have gives and goes. I think there are multiple fundraisers happening. I'm not very privy to that aspect of things. You know, there have been some fights going on, some separations, etc. And you know, my role is to report on their case, and so I have stayed out of the fundraising stuff. So I'm not very familiar with it.
right, you have to be kind of an objective observer. Yeah.
It is mind-boggling that you are essentially the only journalist in Canada following this case. Like, that is insane. That's absolutely mind-boggling to me. You know, I've heard a lot of people use the term punishment by process. And this,
Yes.
you know, this seems to be a tactic of the Trudeau regime. Is that like sort of your take on it? Have you heard people reflect on it that way? Like, you know, what and what does that really mean, punishment by process? Like, what? Why is it? I guess you're saying that's legal in Canada. That's constitutional.
Yes, I have interviewed many people, including Arthur Pawlowski, who refer to this prosecution as, you know, the process is the punishment. And yes, this is the general consensus among the people, the supporters. And to me, it's familiar because my background, I'm from Turkey. And, you know, in Turkey, you have tens of thousands of people every year being prosecuted by the government for insulting the president. But they were not insulting, they were just criticizing the government online. But that doesn't matter, because even though at the end the court says, okay, you were just criticizing, you were not insulting, but the process is the punishment. Now you have to go to the police station, you have to give a statement, now you're broke, etc. Yeah. So that's one similarity I see here in Canada that's being employed. I was I was ticketed, fined 5 times in Montreal covering the COVID mandates. Even though I was exempt, I was fine with those atrocious tickets. And, you know, the process is the punishment. So indeed, I think this is what's happening to them as well, because this is now a common tactic in Canada where you punish people by process. And this is not only employed by governments, and this is not a new phenomenon. This is also employed by individuals to other individuals, or corporations to other individuals.
Corporations, when they sue individuals, they know that even if they're wrong, they're going to carry it out for 10 years, and they won't, the individual won't be able to continue to sustain the funds that it requires.
Yeah.
But so the fact that the legacy media is not covering it, and that it seems like it's not just that they're not covering it, it's almost a suppression of the story itself. But what I would connect it to is, think about how much funding the trucker convoy got in such a short period of time. So the Canadian people are very aware, at least I would say the majority of Canadian people are very aware of the authoritarian nature of the Trudeau government. And if this story does break, and now that Tucker Carlson's bringing attention to it, I think funding is going to go through. I hope so, but I think that once Canadians actually get light of it and hear about it more, like I hadn't heard about it for a while now until we started talking about it, Simon, and you showed me Mocha's work. But this, you know, the legacy media suppression, I think for sure has to do with them understanding that there will be a lot of funding, and this will bring so much attention to the government and to the process in Canada. So they can try to suppress it, but I mean, thank you for your work, honestly, to bring this to light, because it's not just them, even though like we got to fight for them, but it's for all Canadians, right? It's scary, like you said, that that they can bend the Constitution in a way and make this legal.
So I want to focus on what the legacy media has said, because, you know, and Tucker Carlson even showed a clip of this, that they have this narrative going on that these men were conspiring to murder RCMP officers. And in the media coverage, they claim that they are associated with an unnamed group that was directing them. So this seems to be the narrative that was pushed along. And this is, I guess, what is being debated in the courtroom. But now at this point, we're restricted in what we can talk about because there's numerous publication bans. Can you talk about the relationship between the narrative that the media used to spin this case against these men versus the publication bans that are now in place on the case?
Yes, basically the publication bans cover the evidence, Crown's narrative, etc., and it is justified as. Oh, it also covers judge's reasoning in cases. So the judge would make a ruling, deny bail, etc. We cannot know the reasoning, what she relied on, and also expert witnesses, the witnesses that are coming to give their expert opinion, etc. All those would be available after the jury is selected, and we will see those expert witnesses, because some of the expert witnesses, they're not experts in my opinion. They are just political, useful tools of the government, and we will see that when the papers come out, and we will see what arguments were being made, what they were being put through. People will finally see. But for now, it's under a publication ban, and we can't broadcast it. One of the guys I interviewed the other day, one of the farmers who stood up in courthouse when the bail was denied for Chris Carbert, one of the Coutts four, he stood up in the courthouse and said, "This is injustice," and the sheriffs escorted him out. Later, I interviewed him. Hey, you did this. Do you have any more comments? And he shared his comments with me. He said, "You know what? This country is the justice system is corrupt, etc." And he had another ongoing legal battle against him in a different case, similar to this one, where he was charged, I believe, with mischief over 5,000 for blockading the border. And he told me that he got a call from his lawyer saying the Crown told them that they will use this interview against him in court. So this is a message they're watching, and they're basically sending a message: be careful what you say to the media. You cannot express your opinion that the justice system is not working right. Who has right now? We've
So
seen
absurd.
through years, like, who trusts the government right now? Who trusts the justice system? We see it every day.
There is a significant part of the country that does, but
True.
You're right. You're right, though. Yeah, I mean, people that are reasonable and people that are actually awake to what's going on, it's a joke. And now it's worldwide, right? The idea that Justin Trudeau is this tyrant, this authoritarian, is being spoken about all over the world, right? It's weird that he's not aware of this. He has to either be so sheltered from outside media and what people are talking about and his own citizens are talking about, or he's a sociopath and a narcissist, which it might be a mix of both, tell you the truth. And he's just thinks that everybody else is an idiot and he's right. But
yeah, I think, like, when we look at Trudeau's support and him having 33% of the voters, right? He's in power with 33% of the Canadian votership, which is historically the lowest support a prime minister has ever had in Canadian history. So there is a small group that he utilizes to stay in power because our electoral system is so fractured, an electoral system that Justin Trudeau claimed he would reform when he first got into power. He then retracted that offer and has stayed in power ever since. I mean, my understanding is that as long as Trudeau can keep that small group radicalized and disinformed, that's really what he needs. And so my theory is really that he doesn't care about what the world news is saying. He doesn't care about what dissent in Canada is. As long as he keeps that group radicalized and misinformed, he maintains his grip on the entire Canadian government and everything that he's got his fingers in, which is now this huge globalist system of, power players in the world.
And he has this huge bureaucracy behind him that he's built, right? And this guy,
growing.
so he's been in power for 8 years.
Yeah.
He could, in Canada, we don't have term limits, right? Or term limit for the prime minister. He can potentially or ostensibly be in power forever. And he would, right? He's talking about running again in 2025, even though his popularity and everything, even in the Liberal Party, has fallen. He's the one who, I mean, he's the one. All the Liberals talk about democracy and Putin's a tyrant and this and that. And it's like, look at what's happening here. This is scary to see that what Canada has become and descended into.
Okay, can I parse out the publication bans a little bit more? Because there's two different things going on here. Some of them are from the Crown, and some of them are from the defense. So is it fair to say that the defense put in place the publication ban to protect the defendants from media propaganda? Is that
Interesting.
that seems to be what happened? Was that part of the defense's strategy to stop the media from what they were doing to these men publicly?
Yes, it certainly looks like that. I can't say it for certain, but the lawyers operate like that. They say, hey, this is what we need to do. And when you're the client, you have to defer to their expert opinion, unless if you want to direct the strategy and give commands to the lawyers. But when you're an ordinary man with no criminal background and you're stuck in jail and, you're going to possibly believe and do and agree to whatever your lawyer says. And yeah, publication ban in place, people say, this is preventing the truth from being heard. This is atrocious. And I think there's some truth to that perspective, but also there's some truth to the other side as well. People say, hey, we can't just let the media run with it about something that they haven't been convicted of, and creating this public opinion of a negative public opinion against them, and causing prejudice among potential jury. So that's the debate about this subject. But there has been a recent ruling in Canada where there's an automatic publication ban on all pretrial matters. Yeah, so you can't discuss what's happening in those.
This is all criminal trials?
I
Or
believe
all
so,
trials?
yes.
So
Yeah,
then
so
you've been inside the courtroom and there's lots that you've seen and experienced that you cannot talk about right now.
that's right. I would love to talk about them. I would love to broadcast them. It's very, very interesting, but I can't. So I will have to wait until the publication ban
Right.
is lifted, and then I can refer to, hey, this is what he said, she said, argued, etc.
So this is evidence and testimony particularly, but you're allowed to have your own opinion, right? You can discuss your opinion of the matter to a certain extent.
Well, that's where it gets tricky.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty certain they're looking at every opportunity to get me out of that courthouse.
Right. They
They're
don't want you there.
watching carefully. I have an undertaking, so I have to be careful, and I don't have the money to have lawyer review, my footage or my
Yeah.
reporting, etc. So I always, I
Definitely
try
be
to be
very careful
careful.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because if I get kicked out of that courtroom, there's no other media in there, and I
I'm
just don't
surprised
want to risk that.
Rebel News is not following this at all. Are
Well,
you
Rebel News is my former employer, and
okay?
yeah, I'm not sure how much I can discuss about them. So
All right, we'll stay away from that.
Okay, so let's look at something here because we just discussed the publications ban that is being used by the defense potentially to protect the Coutts 4 from narrative warfare, but also it could be harming them because it could be stymieing coverage of this, which we can see that the coverage has been very poor aside from the work that you're doing. I want to just reflect on the other side of it, which is seemingly like government weaponization of publication bans. Like, we've seen this in the past. There's a father in BC whose daughter was first socially transitioned by her school, sent to a therapist, who then furthered the social transition along by setting the daughter up with a medical practitioner, who then moved the daughter towards medical transition using puberty blockers. From my understanding, this was all done without any parental consent, and they actually had the daughter, from my recollection, sign the consent form, which even stated that she might be sterilized by it, that the effects were unknown. So it got to that point. So this father in BC, then he started trying to speak out about it. From what I understand, the publication ban was used in that instance, and that really stopped coverage of a story that showed that this child was transitioned by the state, and then the whole thing was basically protected by seemingly activist lawyers and activist judges. What do you understand about that case? Just to give people a sense of, what else has the government done with publication bans, and, what do you understand about that particular story and how that was used?
I think Canada is slowly becoming, or the Canadian public is slowly becoming familiar with these publication bans. They are a thing. They are employed commonly. And in those cases, like the case you mentioned, it can be used against the interest of a father, for example. And it's atrocious. It's misuse, it could happen. I'm coming from a country where publication bans are a thing of common occurrence.
Right, it's the
For
normal.
example, it's the normal, not just court cases though, for news as well. For example, there was 10 years ago, I remember, I was in Istanbul, there was a bombing, and immediately a terror attack happens, the government would put a publication ban. They would go to court and say, we need to put a publication ban. The court would say, okay, you got it. And they would also slow down the internet, etc., so people don't see it, what happened, the atrocious crime that's been committed by terrorists.
Turkey, people don't understand. Turkey's not a
80
small
million
country.
people.
How many?
80 million.
80 million.
And Turkey is not as big as Canada. It's a small country, but has twice the population. So it's a very crowded country. It's a very good, nice country. But let me tell you this. Look, I remember those days. And when there's a terror attack happening, there would be a publication ban. The media couldn't talk about it. So there was one media who was against the government. So they put a headline on TV saying, something happened in Sultanahmet. Well, a bomb exploded in Sultanahmet. They can't say that. So they would say, something happened.
Workarounds.
So I employed the same tactic,
Yeah.
At some point there was, in the Coutts 4 case, there was a talk about an envelope. And, there was a lot of hype around this envelope. What's in it? Is it going to set the man free? Is it going to prove crime fraud, etc.? But that decision was under a publication ban, and also it was sealed. So we shouldn't even know about it. I don't even know how that word got to be public, but I made a publication because I can't say what was decided. I said something was decided regarding the envelope.
Just to at least bring it to light so people can then investigate further, right?
Yeah.
That's a good tactic.
Because, I'm trying every option I can to publicize the trial as much as I can without breaking the law.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but just the fact that you're there covering it is huge, because it's bringing light to it, and people today are able to dig and find obviously the evidence and whatnot they won't have access to, but at least it's bringing awareness to it, and people are a lot more focused on it now.
Some of the stuff that was explored in Tucker Carlson. So there's this whole narrative around the Coutts 4 and the Coutts blockade and the usage of the Emergencies Act. And
you know what, Simon, sorry, let's maybe it'd be a good idea to actually explain it, because we're assuming that people that are watching actually know and understand what the Coutts situation is. You explained it a little bit, Mocha. You want to maybe both of you kind of explain what the situation is to give context?
Yeah, like I think the context, like let's get into the context about the Coutts 4 in terms of the application of the Emergencies Act, and then there's the involvement of, I guess, Jeremy McKenzie and Diagolon. There's this whole system of propaganda and misdirection that seems to be tied into the Coutts 4. So could you walk us through like what the Coutts 4 were doing, and then the accusation, and then the way they used a meme to eventually get the Emergencies Act in place, like that whole connection?
Sure. So the 4 men are accused of conspiracy to murder RCMP. Conspiracy means, planning, so I can't talk about the evidence against them due to publication bans, but this is what they have been charged with. Not convicted, charged. So now they are standing trial. They have been going through a pre-trial for the last 2 years. They are being kept in remand, atrocious place to be kept in. And the media is not paying attention to the story. So their situation is very, very bleak. They are paying more than $500,000 per person for lawyers. And, each of them are their own individual, and they're not allowed to stay in the same prison. So they would be sent to other prisons, other remands across the province, and they would be brought in all across the place for the court hearing. Their bails have been denied each. Chris Carbert had a second bail hearing, denied again. And the situation doesn't look good for them. This is destroying families. They had family members die while they're in remand. And, recently a federal court ruled that the invocation of the Emergencies Act was unreasonable, was illegal. But in response, the government said, we will appeal this. And on top of that, the government said, it was a tough time. There were guns, for example, in Coutts, etc. So their case is tied to the Emergencies Act, the justification of the Emergencies Act. That is why it's such a high-profile case.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah. But so they were in Coutts, and what was the situation? So the idea was that it was a protest, right? And they were blockading the border between the US and Canada. Was there access for people, or was it completely blockaded? What was the nature of the protest?
Well, I've been to that blockade like many times, and the blockade, first of all, there was a police blockade before the real blockade. So there's Coutts, that's the border town, and then a few kilometers up, there is a town called Milk River. Milk River, the police set a blockade, not allowing anyone in except if they are residents. So there in Milk River, you had tens of thousands of people, cars, trucks, all, right at the blockade of the police, staying there overnight, protesting in support of those down in Coutts. I would be allowed to travel there as a member of the media. They would allow me to pass. And it was like very crazy because you have police officers with automatic weapons. I would turn on my light, my inside light of my car, and turn off my beam lights so the police could see inside, etc., checking ID. And you would go there, unmarked cars, and it's a border crossing, so you have the SWAT team, etc. Very, very highly secured area. And yeah, ghost cars are constantly passing by around. And so you would go down to Coutts, and there where the original protest is taking place, where they block the border. They would often open the border up for trucks to pass, etc., and then close it again. And depending on negotiations with the RCMP would send 2 officers in there to discuss, and they would be surrounded by all the protesters. And I always thought, like, wow, that's brave of them doing this, but there was no immediate harm to them.
There was never any explicit hostility towards the RCMP or towards people that they were negotiating with, right? They were just asking to be heard.
That's right. And they were just asking for the mandates to be dropped. And they achieved their objective to a certain degree, but paid a very heavy price for it. Yeah. Now, one trucker, James Sowery, is but actually convicted of dangerous driving. And all he did was hit a pylon, he says, accidentally. And he had a lawyer from the, he had a legal aid lawyer that he says, was not good, was not competent, and that's why he got convicted. But his license was suspended since last year, since almost 2 years now. So he hasn't been able to truck and make money. He can't drive. He has to do odd jobs here and there. And he doesn't have that sort of money to fund a competent lawyer. So he appeals to the public. So that's how they destroy lives. That's just one case. There are other people charged as well with mischief. Artur Pawlowski, for example, spent 50 days in jail, who was convicted.
Can you explain a bit about Artur Pawlowski?
Yeah.
How do you say his name? Pawlowski?
Artur Pawlowski. Yes. So he's a Calgary pastor. He came down to Coutts to give a sermon. Mm-hmm. In his sermon, he convinced the truckers to not leave the blockade and head to Edmonton, because that's what they were planning. They were being convinced to, hey, leave the border blockade alone and go to Edmonton. But the pastor gave a very fiery speech, very encouraging, motivational speech there, which made convince the truckers, basically. The truckers were convinced to stay there and keep protesting. After that, the pastor went home and he was arrested. The police came to his home. They grabbed him by the legs, by the arms, and took him to remand. And he was remanded for 50 days. And there was a trial.
So Artur Pawlowski, he was in remand for 50 days without trial again. But so this started way earlier for him, right? So Coutts was 2022. All throughout the pandemic, though, from day one, the pandemic, he kept his church open and refused to allow the RCMP in or the police in, and that brought him a lot of attention, a lot of government attention.
This is correct. And recently there was a court ruling finding him guilty of mischief, basically because of the sermon he gave at
mischief.
Border blockade.
Mischief. This is what they're doing. Mischief. They're using mischief sorry.
Actually, he was. Actually, he was charged and convicted of eco-terrorism. He's the first man to be charged with blockading critical infrastructure. But he didn't blockade anything. He didn't
He
have a
just spoke
truck there. He just spoke there, right? So he's the first one to be charged. And this is not federal law. This is Alberta's law. Alberta, Jason Kenney passed this law to prevent from eco-activists blockading, railways or electric facility,
Whoa.
but now it was used against him.
Okay,
And
so have
he's
any
appealing.
actual eco-terrorists been arrested under that same law?
No.
Just him.
Yeah.
So
He's the first one.
This is seemingly a law that if you saw it on the surface, you'd think a conservative government is pushing back against climate change extremists, shutting down. You'd think that is the law, but then here we go, and it's being used to stop a pastor from supporting the truckers at the Coutts blockade.
Yeah. His speech was, he spent time for the way he spoke, the things he said.
Canada's becoming a farce. This is like, at face value, this is a farce, right? Like it's silly, but obviously the court system clearly is corrupt, and we know that. You can't. I don't know if you can say anything about that. I don't know if you want to be associated with that. So that's my words. But in the States, obviously, we're seeing a similar thing with January 6th and whatnot. But this really puts Canada in a weird place, along the lines of them closing bank accounts. This as well, it puts such a negative light on Canada that it will stifle investment. It will stifle any kind of working together with other countries. This is really bad for Canada as a whole.
I mean, look at Canada's relationship with India.
You're right. His comments about Modi and about I can't remember the guy's name, but he talks about Justin Trudeau a lot. This government has really done such damage to this country that otherwise Canada has been a flourishing country and a place where people have immigrated since day one. Now, for the first time ever, we're seeing this exodus of people that can't sustain their lives. It's absurd.
This is correct. I spoke to international students last week in Brampton, Ontario. And I used to live in Toronto. I went to college there, and there are a lot of international students who are struggling to pay rent, struggling to find a job, struggling to, keep up with their classes, because it's so heavy on them. That's not what they were promised. So I asked them, is this Canada you imagined? And they said, no, hell no. This is not the Canada we imagined. Everything is expensive. The prices are always going up. Inflation, grocery prices are up, as I asked, well, if you had a child, would you send it to Canada? They're like, hell no, we'll send it to elsewhere. And the kid said, I would urge other potential international students to stay in your country. Don't come to Canada. There's inflation everywhere. Just stay in your country. Right. One of them was calling Justin Trudeau the next Kim Jong-un. They're saying, if you don't have money in this country, every right you have will be exploited.
You're exact. This ties in perfectly with what you're talking about with the justice system, because they can use it against you. Sorry, go ahead, Simon.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to address something though, because there's a claim from a lot of right-wing media in Canada and in the United States that the flooding of the country with immigrants is a tactic to try to secure votes and to manipulate elections, right?
Illegal immigrants, though, there's a difference.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. And this, so there's this claim, but then you're going, I guess that you're not talking to illegal immigrants, but I think there's still
international students.
It's international students. Does that blow up this sort of idea that the left is trying to rely on like immigrants, both illegal and legal, to sway the vote? I mean, it seems like Trudeau isn't even winning over the hearts of the people that he's just letting into the country, or that he's saying diversity is our strength, and there's this whole narrative of how Canada's diversity is the ultimate, and we're like the country that lets the most immigrants in like the world. Is your experience with like these international students and all of this, does it counter this idea that these populations are being used to sway the vote?
Yes, I think only a certain portion of these populations are aware and dissatisfied with Trudeau. But, the people I talked to were young people. They're international students. They're going to college, university. But their parents could have a very different opinion than them. most of Toronto, half of them, their first language is not English. Most of them consume the news in other languages, in Turkish or in Farsi or in Indian language, So, how do you reach out to that population? This is a serious population. It's a serious mass. And in Canada, there is something called ghetto politics. People vote a certain way because a person in authority that they see as an authority, like a religious figure, a temple, etc., tell them to vote that way. So because of these ghetto politics, those temples or those organizations that control these ghettos, they sway immense power over politicians, over Justin Trudeau. For example, look at NDP. Jagmeet Singh, how many votes he got? 36,000. Yet he is the one who is allowing Trudeau to stay in power, although he acts like he's a critic of him.
He's definitely controlled opposition. There's
Yeah.
there's no opposition there. They're just two buddies, trying to put on a show for us.
Well, it's the uniparty. We're looking at the uniparty that
Right.
seems to be. Well, let's focus on that actually, because like Canada is being steered in a particular direction, right? And it's not just politics, right? We're not looking at just political differences. Canada is collapsing, right? We have a lot of engineered collapse, it would seem. What do you think the direction that Trudeau and the globalist institutions that he's working so closely with, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, what is he up to, in your opinion? What is he trying to do to Canada? What is he trying to use Canada for? Where is this headed?
It's hard to predict where this headed, but if he plans to run for another term, that is a little uncomfortable. I hope the Liberals don't allow that to happen, because, whether they allow it or not, it would show how arrogant he is, that he wants to just stay in power forever. Like, you've been in power for 8 years now. Please disappear.
Yeah, take a
Things
hike.
have been, like inflation is up. This guy
Everything
is
is
planning
worse.
to bring.
Everything is worse since from the day he got into office. Everything is just plummeted. It's crazy.
And he still plans to bring 1 million new immigrants every year. Like, where are they going to stay? There's no places, so rent is going to keep going up and wages are going to keep going down. But if you point this out, you're a racist. So his mindset operates based on knowing that there will never be any repercussions to him. He will never have to pay the price, so he can just act the way he sees fit.
That's the whole political elite class. They all are so distant from the repercussions of their actions and their decisions. I'd like to comment quickly on immigration, right? Canada actually, in terms of who they allow to immigrate or who they allow in the country to immigrate legally and to give permanent residency to and whatnot and visas to, they are very selective of people. And because Canada is, has the border with the US and it's not some place that you could just waltz into, they're very selective, I think, with who they allow in. And a lot of the people that come are people that are decently well established in other countries. So they're people that would in some sense be conservative, that would wind up contributing to the economy. Now, the problem with the housing situation is because there's so many restrictions on building, and there's so, like, to get permits and to all this nonsense. Alberta, they're really weaponizing that against the builders there and the capitalists there, people that want to actually have a free market. So there's this socialist, contention with the government that it thinks it needs to provide affordable housing, but the problem is they are the ones making housing unaffordable, right? So there's a weird interplay in terms of immigration. Like, I think immigration, maybe not 1 million people a year, but a reasonable amount of immigration is good for a country that's building and that's growing. And for example, a lot of places in Montreal where I live used to have restaurants and a lot of places that were open 24/7 for some of them, and a lot of them that were open till 4 a.m. Now restaurants close at like 10 p.m. because they can't afford to pay workers, right? So there is a spectrum of what kind of employee or what kind of worker there is, and people go through life, when you're young, you start working at a restaurant, and then you develop into something that is more. Thomas Sowell talks a lot about this. But so the immigration aspect when it comes to voting in the States, I think, is a little different than the legal immigration, because the illegal immigration is not so much, and this might be a point that not everybody agrees with, but it's not so much about them actually voting as it is actually putting out ballots for there to be a vote for them. So if you have 10 million illegal immigrants, or it's probably 20 million now in the country, then you have 20 million ballots that are up for grabs, if you will. Because I don't know if you followed the 2020 election at all, but a big part of it was that there was just ballots sent out to everybody without any, multiple ballots sent out to people. So that's kind of the distinction there with illegal immigration and immigration and the vote, in my opinion. What I'd like to actually comment on quickly is, we spoke about this briefly before we started, is Danielle Smith and her being asked to have a conversation with Artur Pawlowski, and her comments on why she wasn't able to, or why she didn't want to get involved in the case. Can you give a little bit of context on that?
Sure. So she was asked by Tucker Carlson yesterday in a public venue with large attendance about the Coutts 4, the situation of the 4 men who are remanded for almost more than 710 days. And he was asked, is there anything she can do? And she said, well, there was another individual in a similar situation, and she was referring to Artur Pawlowski, where she said she did try to help, but she realized that you cannot stop political prosecutions politically. Meaning you can start political prosecution, but you cannot end it. Where she was stressing that she was being told that the judiciary needs to be independent, and
Right,
you can't do
to
that.
meddle is one of the worst things you can do as a politician, right? Technically.
So that's what, during the election, this was used against her for trying to, or in a phone recording, promising to help Pawlowski.
And she did it
This
very
was
vaguely, though. She just said she would do what she would see. She would look into what she can do, right? She didn't say, I'm going to throw out your case, or like that was a bit of a weird thing too, because I think it was Archer that recorded the conversation and released it. And that was a bit of a, I don't know, that was a bit of a weird point there. But from what I understand, she never said that she was going to, throw out his case or anything.
Yeah, Arthur is saying that his lawyer actually released it without his approval or knowledge. So,
okay, that makes sense.
They fired that lawyer, etc. So, yeah, she was asked that question, and she said, "Oh well, I'm just learning. I'm learning the rules as I go by." But I think a strong politician who wanted to solve this issue would just, wink at her crown prosecutor or minister of justice, and if the minister of justice doesn't stop the prosecution, she could just replace the minister of justice with someone who will. Now, there are constraints on how much a premier can do, because they are beholden to public opinion, and they are maybe afraid of the media. But a strong premier could, do this, could end this. There are ways to do it. Look at SNC-Lavalin. Look at the treatment they got.
The liberals would do that 100%.
They would pass a law to save SNC-Lavalin. So, if you're friendly, if you're politically established, for example, the Air India bombers, who went to jail over that? The deadliest terror attack in Canada's history. 2 people were suspected as the masterminds, but CSIS was destroying the interviews, the recordings they had. This is like all over mainstream media. 9 out of 10 Canadians don't know about this, but CSIS was actively trying to sabotage the investigation of the RCMP into who did the deadliest terror attack in Canada's history. So if you're because why? Because they were politically connected. The perpetrators would attend prime ministers' fundraising events, premier events, and they had ghettos that they can control, that they can, just like when you were talking about immigration. If you have a certain riding where it's getting excess of illegal migrants or immigrants, it's going to vote a certain way. And when you have a particular ethnic group or a religious group coming together in one riding, you're going to get a representative from that riding that is going to act in their best interest, and their best interest may not align with the rest of the country.
You know what, Simon? I think you're right. Canada, the immigration and the vote might be more connected directly like that.
Yeah, it seems that way. And I think assessing what they're up to with that is something we have to really keep our eyes on, especially because, like you said, there's these instances where a politically connected terrorist is suddenly protected. Like it's pretty mind-boggling. The corruption, like running that deep in CSIS, it's not the first time I've seen or heard this. And I've seen similar issues with the RCMP being deeply politically influenced. There was a shooter a while back who turned out was connected to the RCMP here in Canada. They then used that shooter story to push forward anti-gun laws. Did you follow that story or cover that story at all?
I was familiar with the story. Yes, it was shocking. There was, I think, it resulted in head of RCMP resigning because there were communications coming out between her, and Justin Trudeau. While ongoing investigation is happening, they are releasing the information of the gun that was used, etc., so that the Liberals could use it as, hey, we need to ban these guns.
So there seems to be this habit, this tactic, I would say, because really we should be speaking in terms of warfare, in my opinion. There's a tactic of the Trudeau government to create their own evidence and then use it to further things along. It's basically a Hegelian dialectic. Are you familiar with Trudeau's use of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and the sort of cyclical system they have going on? Would you be able to speak to that at all? And if any of that plays into the Coutts or the Emergencies Act or any of that?
Yes, it certainly plays into that. And, I can't discuss what's going on in the court cases, but basically, anti-hate network is being used by the government to benefit their own policies and also to prosecute dissidents. Anti-hate network, their people involved with that organization are being used as expert witnesses in court cases, etc. Anti-hate network is also receiving government funding. So this is Canada. This is how it operates. So you have a government-funded organization, and its members are participating as, or people who have worked there participating as expert witnesses in court cases. And they also participate in shaping the public opinion, making stories about people, about the things they said in the past, etc., to demonize them and to paint them in a bad light. So the government and anti-hate network, they go hand in hand.
And I think just to let people know that there was actually a case where the Canadian Anti-Hate Network was accused of supporting Antifa. And they tried to sue this person who made that claim for defamation. And the Canadian Anti-Hate Network lost that case. And the judge ruled that they, in fact, were supporting Antifa as a violent organization. And so, it really kind of blew up their whole narrative of being politically neutral, not funded by the government, and not connected to essentially a terrorist organization. So, it seems like this is a really radical group of people who have government money, who will essentially be tasked to perform character assassination on anyone Justin Trudeau wants, and then he can cite them as experts to be able to politically or legally persecute people. I mean, this is like the full weaponization of not only the media, but an activist organization and the justice system. I mean, from your experience, what is left in Canada that has not been encroached upon by the Trudeau regime? Is there, where do we look to for people that aren't totally politicized by him?
Well, he has encroached on every right except the rights of SNC-Lavalin and other corrupt companies robbing Canadians blind.
People
We have
that he's making money off
projects.
of, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We have P3 projects going across this country, hundreds of billions of dollars, and you have SNC-Lavalin participating. You have another foreign French giant, Vinci, participating with you have another company participating with a history of corruption who's banned by the World Bank for defrauding poor nations. Like, what benefit can Canada get out of them? But they are actively bidding and participating and stealing. Like, look at Gordie Howe International Bridge Project, for example. It's an international bridge. Canada is paying all the money, not the United States. The United States is paying 15 million. Canada is paying almost $7 billion, building America's own border
The crossing
compound.
bridge.
Yeah, the compound itself,
Okay.
and the
For the
bridge
border.
itself as well. Everything. And, the price tag jumped from being, it was pitched by the Harper government in 2012 as $1 billion bridge. This was the headline. How did it end up being $7 billion now? Because there was $500,000 almost in early works that was spent even before the award. And you look at the participants, they all have a history. Most of them have a history of corruption and unethical behavior around the world. And so now the price is up. We had CarMax, for example. Anyways, I won't get into too much details, but
Go ahead.
Yeah, feel free.
okay. So we had Aecon, for example, who was in the bidding process for Gordie Howe International Bridge Project. And then just almost like last minute, they dropped out from the bidding process. And then they announced that, we dropped out because for business purposes.
Oh yeah.
Also, we signed a definitive agreement with China. We're selling ourselves to China. But then the government said, whoa, you can't just do that. We have to review this for security purposes. They reviewed it and they said after 40 days, they said, you know what? You can't sell to China, actually. You can't do that. But then what happened is by that time, Gordie Howe Bridge was awarded to the consortium, and somehow Aecon was allowed to join back in to participate in the construction. So this is the story that I'm working on right now. How did Aecon was allowed back in? What did they do to be allowed back in? They needed the approval of the Ministry of Infrastructure. So why were they given that approval? What did they do to be given that approval? A lot of question marks. And at that time, the infrastructure minister was Amarjeet Sohi. Amarjeet Sohi has a bad history regarding corruption. What I mean by that is he was having his middle brother's trucking company employed by a construction company in Regina, Saskatchewan. This was the Regina Bypass Project, and there was a environmental stipulation imposed on the province saying, hey, if you're not going to go through a federal environmental assessment, which could take many, many years, you are not going to use your own aggregate, your own resources for this project. This is what was the stipulation. So the government said, okay, we're not going to use our own rock. We're not going to do this. We're going to have the private contractor deal with it, buy it from other private contractors. But that's not what happened. The private contractor was seemingly, as evidence suggests, I've been to those places, those huge holes in the ground. They were supplied approximately $500 million worth of aggregate, which the Saskatchewan government later bought back because they were paying for the aggregate in the first place. It was in the cost. But if the French giant Vinci, RBDB, got that aggregate for free, they are making $500 million profit.
You're talking about aggregate that's used for concrete,
for the construction of the highway. So, and that's one aspect of the scandal. But another aspect is Amarjeet Sohi, the infrastructure minister at the time, did not disclose his brother's trucking company, White Rock Ventures. So his brother Harkesh had a company, and they would also donate to his political campaigns back when he was a councillor. But he didn't disclose this in his conflict of interest disclosures. So the trucks would come, they would carry all the rocks and everything, get paid by the French giant, and there's allegation that he personally came to Regina secretly to facilitate this. And we have a confirmation from eyewitnesses, one of them being Vinci RBDB's material manager, saying, yes, I was in that meeting on February 21st, 2017. So I would encourage you gentlemen and anyone watching, if this makes it into the cut, to check it out, this story, the Regina Bypass Project. You could check it out on mediabezirgan.com.
What's the website?
mediabezirgan.com. So okay, it's media and then my last name.
Yeah, I'll put it in here in the post edit, and I'll go through some articles. Yeah, it pun intended. This sounds like highway robbery to me.
Well played. Well played. Well,
So this is allowed to go.
It's
Yeah, go
insane.
ahead.
There's
Sorry.
so much corruption. It's just blatant.
yes, and it looks like the culture of Canada, the culture of Canadian politics, Canadian business, it seems like so many scandals have been allowed to thrive that there is a growing attitude among the people who are this internally corrupt that shit, you can get away with this here. Like, let's
Yeah.
go for it. It's hard to get caught. Even if we get
Mhm.
exposed, it's unlikely that there'll be justice. There seems to be a growing attitude where this is a den of corruption. This, if you want to be corrupt and thrive on criminal actions, Canada's the place to go. They're going to let it slide if you're in with the right people. I mean, that's a scary thing. If we have a bit more time, there's a few more things that I want to touch on, if that's all right. Because one of the things that came up in your most current story is the involvement of China. And Canada's relationship with China, I mean, this has been a major issue in so many regards. You know, we have number one, there is the connection with, you know, COVID and China. And there's a scandal where, you know, allegedly there was a Canadian military operation in China that came back from China and is supposedly the origins of, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic being brought here from China. You know, that narrative has some issues, but there's a scandal there at least. But then we also have just Trudeau's relationship with China, him openly saying that he admires China's basic dictatorship. We have the fact that China was allowed to come here and perform military exercises with the Canadian military. China has been given access to classified laboratories in Canada. It seems like there's almost nowhere in Canada that China cannot go, have an influence over. I mean, I guess it's a free-for-all. What's your experience with the influence of China on Canada, you know, in the past, but moving forward?
Well, it's not limited to China, but there are other countries and other interest groups at play having an immense influence over the government. And when you see an action taken by the government being like, wait, this is not in our best interest. Why are we doing this? Well, it's in the best interest of those who, you know, gave them the votes, those who allowed them to get into that position, because those forces control ridings, they control the population there. We had an MP from Ontario, for example, a couple of months ago, who was exposed as having a relationship with China, that he was installed there by Chinese lobbyists, etc., within the Liberal government. But in terms of when you said about what you said about the Uni Party, you know, it seems like Canada is a country where Liberals and Conservatives each take turns to rob the country blind.
I really hope that's not true about Pierre Poilievre, but we'll see. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are with him. Do you have any thoughts on Pierre Poilievre?
Well, we'll have to see how he operates, what he does. You know,
I mean,
there
he's
are
saying
some.
he's saying the right things. What he does afterwards is, or some of the right things. What he does afterwards is a different story.
That's right, and you know, I would urge caution with people who say the right things, because they might be saying the things you want to hear,
Mm.
and we'll see how he does. You know, I don't want to be too prejudiced against anyone, but you know, we'll judge them by their actions.
Right, right. Well, he seems at least to be competent, right? I don't know if he's actually an economist, but he seems to be familiar with, you know, Milton Friedman and Adam Smith and the free market economy. So hopefully, at least in that perspective, he would be on the right side of things. In terms of what he would have done in the COVID era, I don't think I think he might have aligned a little more with Justin Trudeau than I would have liked personally.
He did not speak out against lockdowns and mandates at that time. He had nothing to say. Sure, retrospectively, he's been somewhat critical, but at the time when we needed people of his position to actually say this is wrong, he did not say anything. And you know, there's something to be said about that. But the other thing that I wonder is, if we have countries like China, like clearly, deeply influencing things in Canada, China has an immense amount of power over what occurs here, as, like you said, do other countries. And then we also have people like Klaus Schwab saying, we have penetrated the cabinets of the world, you know, saying Justin Trudeau is one of the young leaders of the World Economic Forum, and he, you know, they've influence over the cabinet here and in other countries. And you do indeed see Justin Trudeau working at the behest of the World Economic Forum, working at the behest of the World Health Organization. So I wonder, even if Poilievre comes in guns blazing, how much room is there for the Prime Minister of Canada, given all these globalist powers who seemingly, they seem to puppeteer Justin himself. I don't know how much power Justin even has in this larger system of globalist mechanisms. I have to wonder, like, is he just at the behest of others? How much of this is him? I don't know. I question it. What are your thoughts?
I think this is a very good question. And basically, it doesn't matter who is in power. If you have these power dynamics, it doesn't matter then. But I think what needs to change is there needs to be a great awakening within the Canadian population, being like, hey, enough with pandering to foreign interests. We need to take care of ourselves first. For example, Pierre Poilievre is totally okay with bringing another million immigrants to the country. He's okay with immigration, which is a disservice to immigrants who are coming here thinking they're coming to a country that they can afford, and it's a disservice to people who are living here who barely can get by.
Yeah, at the moment now that we're in, there needs to be almost a moratorium, if you will, to a certain extent on immigration, because things are not in good shape right now. What if things get fixed? It should be a growing population to a certain extent.
Yeah, but if you're a landlord, for example, and you own many properties, you would want more immigration because it drives the rent up. Or if you're an employer, a big employer, you would want more immigration because it drives the wages down. So, it's not like everyone is against immigration because of the negative things that it causes. It's not like everyone is against higher rent. No, some landlords are happy with the rent going up.
You're completely right in that case. In the situation that we're in terms of just bringing in more people, it's going to make it harder for everybody living here, and for the people coming in, like you're saying, the people you're talking to, these students, international students. This is not the country they thought they were coming to.
Yeah, one of them said, we thought we were coming to a developed country.
That's
Oh my
wild,
God.
right?
That's a huge burn.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
that's
well,
the corruption is reminiscent of third world countries, and it's just so
it is. Yeah,
because
it's
Canada's so
freaky.
small, it's not as publicized. But even in the States, look at Joe Biden. This sending $200 billion to Ukraine in the US. Ukraine is known as the money laundering capital of the world, right? Money goes in there and then it just gets filtered into whoever's pockets that controls the game there, which is likely George Soros, but that's a whole nother discussion. But so the one thing that this reminds me of, I'm sure you both have heard of crony capitalism. People that are liberals believe that capitalism is the root of all evil and the source of all of our problems, right? But the problem is not capitalism, it is crony capitalism. And crony capitalism is only possible with corrupt government, because corruption is inherent to government power. Corruption doesn't even exist. There's corruption within certain organizations, but corruption on a large scale only exists with political influence, right? Even gangs, even mafias and whatnot, they're corrupt because of their ties with the government, their ties with the police and whatnot. So this idea that liberals have, and that Justin Trudeau has in an arrogant way, that conservative economic policies are what's destroying Canada. It's like it's your corruption. It's almost inherent in their philosophy, this corruption, right? This backdoor with the government and the private sector.
Yeah, this guy, Justin Trudeau, he has been caught many times violating ethic laws, and whatever happened to him? Nothing. He's allowed to go and pressure his justice minister into giving preferential treatment to multi-billion-dollar construction companies who are accused of corruption.
It's because he funds the public opinion.
That's right. He controls the media. We don't have a proper media that is reporting on these massive.
Can you explain that actually a little bit? So how the media works here?
So this is how the media works here. The media in Canada is broke. They don't know how to make money. Nobody
They lose a lot of money, right?
They lose a lot of money. They have so many people working there with six-figure salaries, so many executives like the CBC, billion-dollar budget, yet what do they produce? They can't even show up to court in Lethbridge. And very small percentage of Canadians watch them. Very small percentage of Canadians trust them. It's, that percentage of distrust is growing. And basically they have to collect government checks to keep the operations going. And despite collecting government bailout money, they are still firing people. They are still laying off staff, still decreasing their programs, etc. And so now that's why the government, the liberal government, is trying to pass this law where it requires Google and Facebook and others to pay the mainstream media for allowing people to share their articles on their platform, which is like insane. So now we can't even access, like, I can't go Instagram, Facebook to access Canadian news
It's insane.
outlets. It's
Not even Canadian news, any news. If you're in Canada, you cannot look at any news outlet worldwide, I believe. I can't look at CNN, I can't look at Fox, not that I want to, but any news outlet, if you have a Canadian VPN, if you will, you can't see any news outlet. That's insane.
This is the Canada that Trudeau has built.
And they say that it's to promote Canadian content.
Yeah, it is promoting
right.
so much. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so the mainstream media gets all this money and barely survives. So when you are in such a financially compromised position, you're going to do whatever the government says and you're going to
Mhm.
play by the rules. Independent media, they would never be funded by the government. So we are fighting against a machine that is well funded, well oiled, and well established.
Have you guys seen the clip of Justin Trudeau saying, you don't just, I mean, he thinks he's funny and it's not even funny, but it's just so
Yeah.
blatantly corrupt. I mean, he's like, you don't get stellar headlines just by, the reason we get stellar headlines is because we fund them $600 billion a year. You don't get stellar headlines without greasing the wheels a bit. This is what he's saying in a speech. It's like, bro, there's no self-awareness. It's arrogance and lack of self-awareness. You are literally the people that you criticize. You are Putin, if you will. I don't know how much Putin, controls the media in the country, in Russia. I'm sure he does. You're literally that. You're this authoritarian person that control. It's really insane. But then
projection. Yeah. We're always dealing with projection.
Humiliating.
It's really
humiliating the media that takes his money, the government money. He's humiliating them, out in the open. So I would be so ashamed if I was one of those organizations or a member of them.
Oh yeah. And to this point, this is something that the liberals do. They are unafraid of Justin Trudeau influencing people to rule in a certain way for SNC-Lavalin or the ethics commissioner. But then conservatives, we victimize ourselves to the public opinion, and the liberals control public opinion. But Daniel Smith in this Artur Pawlowski case, or in the Coutts case, or now we're seeing in Texas, we spoke about this briefly, in Texas, Governor Abbott is saying to the Supreme Court ruling that Biden sued Texas for to remove the barbed wire there. He's saying, go F yourself, because this is unconstitutional. This is treasonous. He's using the word treasonous. And people are talking about this this resembles the beginnings of a civil war. But this is what conservatives have to start doing. They have to start saying, F you. I don't care about your lying propaganda. We know this is right. We're going to go down this avenue because we know it's right. We don't care what you say in the media. Something has to happen like that, right?
Yeah, well, we have a lack of creative opposition. We have a lack of creative protesting in Canada. I've seen many creative protests in Paris, in Istanbul, and in Amsterdam. I've covered these events, and I think the most creative, the most recent one was the trucker protest, and we haven't had anything like that ever.
Right.
There are so many ways to creatively protest. You could just show up in front of the Justice Center and just stay silent and look. We don't have this political, or let's say legitimate political movement like orchestrated by the conservative government, for example.
Grassroots on
that
the ground.
Would say, we invite all independent media to come to Ottawa on this date to protest against censorship, and we welcome every public to come. So imagine that, all independent media personalities going
You're
there.
completely right. I mean, the left does that, and they do it in a militant way. In the States, they're literally calling for violence against politicians. Democrats are, and we can't even organize to say, look. But that's why they're going so hard on these Coutts guys, and that's why they're going so hard on the January 6th guys. It's because they can protest, but if you protest against them, they're going to weaponize every aspect of the government they can to shut you down, because they're wrong. Like in so many ways, they're just wrong, and they know it. And for you to keep up that lie, you need to have censorship. You need to have the weaponization of the government.
Well, a lot of this really it does map out according to what Yuri Bezmenov said was going to happen to the West. Yuri Bezmenov openly said that there's this communist form of ideological subversion, and that demoralization of a nation is meant to create a situation where once the population is demoralized, then you can start changing the economic and international policies of a nation, and that nation's people will be so demoralized they will do nothing about it because the demoralized state that they are now in. I mean, I can't think of a more accurate depiction of the Canadian struggle than that. A demoralized nation who's watching open corruption but will do nothing about it. I mean, it just looks like communist warfare to me. It's so specifically that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, I've seen the faces of demoralized people walking out of the trials of the Coutts 4, the family members, how broken they are, how broken they feel. Every time they walk into that courthouse, they walk in there with hope and they walk out completely crushed. To see that, to witness that, to see it's really painful.
We're in a sad
Personally,
state in Canada. We're in a sad state right now.
Okay, so let's just like get to the end of this Coutts story as far as you see it. What is the timeline here? Like, what's the timeline that you understand? When might this break so that the publication ban's lifted? When might you be able to share what you've seen from the inside of the courtroom? We've got Tucker Carlson getting the entire world's eyes on this. He's one of the most influential figures in the world now. He has just put a spotlight on the Coutts 4. So there's going to be some international pressure now, undoubtedly. We also have the possibility down the line of perhaps, Trump getting into power, that really undermining everything Trudeau is up to. It would really not be good for him. So there's the possibility of some international pressure, maybe some momentum getting into this. Maybe the international spotlight will bring some funding to these families, help them with their case. But what do you see as the timeline here? Is there any expectation we can create here in terms of this case breaking forward, finally getting into the public, the bans being lifted? What do you think is going to happen?
I predict that 2024 is going to be a very interesting year. I think this could be a year where they finally choose the jury and the publication bans are lifted. Now we can discuss about the case. So I think it's this year that could happen. We have a trial date on February 5th. So that's an important date I'm looking forward to. And right now on Saturday, I believe, there's gonna be a trucker convoy celebrating the anniversary of the blockade, the second anniversary, and they're going to do a slow roll in front of the remand center where one of the guys is being kept in Lethbridge.
Okay, so Saturday,
that's the
January
timeline.
27th, right?
Yeah,
Just so that whenever people are looking at this, Saturday, January 27th, another convoy in support of these guys is going to be unfolding. And then you're saying you're going to have coverage of that convoy.
absolutely.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
we'll
year
do,
I did. This year I will.
We'll
Yeah.
do what we can to promote that, because just any awareness to this right now, we're in dire straits right now in Canada.
No, people need your coverage 100%. It's very, very important. Now, to that point, people should be supporting your work, following you wherever you are. How can people support what you're doing? Being the only journalist in Canada properly covering the Coutts 4, again, that is mind-boggling. Where are you most active? What can people do to support you? What's coming up for you?
Well, they could support me at mediabezirgan.com/donate. I'm in need of financial support because it's not the gas that costs me or the hotel or whatever the expenses to cover these stories, especially the Coutts 4 case. What is really costly is having editorial independence, because you have a media, let's call it the media machine, that is, hell bent on a totally different direction, and they're financially compromised. So,
and they'll do what they can to shut you down too.
Yeah, and if you have such an editorial independence, it also alienates you from the machine, which is fine. So I rely on the generous donations of the public, and you can watch all of my coverage on Twitter and on my website, all the interviews I have done about this matter. I have dozens and dozens of interviews and cases. I follow the Coutts 4 case very closely. And, once I have a little bit of financial support, I'm planning and I'm hoping to hire more people, hire writers, hire video journalists, because the independent media landscape, to be honest with you, very talented people are being stifled or being paid very little wage, and it's to a point that
It's
I
hard to
consider to be
sustain.
exploitation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
so I want to hire these people away from them so that they can be paid good salary and they can do what they're destined to do. And this is my ultimate vision, to have a real strong independent media that is going to report on things that matter.
I love it, man. Your vision is absolutely necessary, and to me, it's just you're waging proper warfare.
Thank you.
It's really so necessary. It's something we really need, and part of what we're up to with Liberty North is to, not just get the word out to Canadians, but to connect Americans with the Canadian perspective and what's going on inside Canada. Americans are really looking to Canada to understand the front lines of this war. And so we really want an understanding and maybe some strategic insight for the American population who's looking to learn from this. Of course, we can see this with Tucker Carlson coming here. There is a big demand. Is there anything, have you connected with Americans over content or issues over there? Like, before we wrap this up, is there anything you want to pass on, not just to Canadians, but to the Americans in a similar struggle?
Well, yeah, Americans who are interested in the January 6th trials should certainly be interested in the Coutts 4 trials, because there are some similarities in that, both of which are being presented by their supporters and family members as being political in nature. So when you have such a claim like that, it becomes very serious and important, because what is happening to them can happen to you. And there are, America and Canada are two different countries. America has the Constitution, we have the Charter, and we have politicians in place. You will see, because if you're looking at a different country with a different system and you understand it, you can see how the politicians are, finding the loopholes and how they're playing it, etc. And when you see that, for example, in my case, I saw it in Turkey, so I see it here. So you will become immune to BS, excuse my language. So I would encourage Americans to look into Canada. Yeah.
Right on. Michael, is there
Thanks,
anything
man.
else you want to toss into the mix before we wrap this up?
No, just to kind of reiterate, or just to emphasize that, yeah, I mean, Canada, it's kind of like a signal of where things are going, because we're more easily treaded upon. The "don't tread on me," like our Charter of Rights, even though Justin Trudeau's father was a co-drafter of it, they walk all over it. They walked all over it, right, in the pandemic. And now what they're doing to these Coutts guys it's baffling to me. It's sickening. It's sickening to even to think about how they're being treated, and what this means for the country. But so, man, keep up what you're doing. I really, really appreciate you talking to us. I would love to, I'm sure Simon as well, to follow up with you, I guess, after maybe February 5th trial. And
Yeah, as much as we can have you back on, honestly, there's so much for us to talk about, and we'd love to keep supporting your work. So, let's keep in touch, and we'll get you back on the show, as soon as there's more to chat about.
I appreciate you guys having me on. It has been a pleasure. It's been one of my favorite interviews so far. So thank you for having me.
Cool.
Right on, brother.
Appreciate that. All right, man. Take care. Folks listening, if you've listened this far, follow Mocha. I'm gonna put your name. How do you spell your last name?
Bezirgan, Bezirgan.
Okay, so I'll put it actually in the post edit, and send people to follow you everywhere. If you've watched this far, folks, we appreciate you. And Simon, you want to close us off?
Yeah.
Keep up the good fight.
Yes. Stay free, stay free-minded, keep up the fight for free thought, free liberty, and we appreciate everyone's support. We look forward to bringing you more excellent content on the Liberty North Show.
Cool. Take care, folks.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Yes, sir.